3PNR with Adam R. This episode of 3PNR is featured on the UnX Network. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R. And on this episode is Kathleen Marden, MUFON member and author. Kathleen, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
I'm actually really excited to speak with you.
Well, thanks.
I have this thing where I don't get to know my guest prior because I as little as possible. I really want to make it the first time meeting him. But with you, I can't help but to learn about you. you're very big in this subject, enormous, in fact.
I have been at it for a very long time.
Yeah, so you have a relation directly to Barney and Bill. Barney and Betty.
Barney and Betty Hill. Betty
yes.
was my mother's sister. And the first person that Betty called when she arrived home on the afternoon of September 20th, 1961. And I was just returning home from school. I was in the 7th grade and walked into the house when my mother was on the phone with Betty. And within a couple of days, my family and I traveled to Betty's and Barney's house, which was only about 20 miles from my childhood home. And that's where I saw some of the evidence and heard the story for myself directly from Betty's mouth.
Huh. You know, for me, UFOs as a kid, interesting subject, right?
Yes.
And then I say this a lot, but I get to my teens, my 20s, it's lost because life happens, right? I shoot pool, hang out with friends. And then 2017 comes around and the military releases the footage of the videos, which at that point, it's not a fantasy anymore, right? You can't deny that. The military's got it. What it is, we don't know. So I'm fascinated again. And then, the pandemic comes around and I have downtime and I'm learning more and more about the subject. And this is exactly what got me into the podcast is I want to learn more. I saw the other podcasts and other shows and I wanted to be the guy to ask the questions and learn more directly from the source, if you would.
Well, I'll tell you, if you want to learn more, you should read my book with Stanton Friedman, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. We spent years doing the archival research at Physical Archives for that book. Everything is footnoted. We have the whole bibliography there, and it's the history of government involvement in the investigation of UFOs, their findings, the decision to cover up the findings, and why, the people who were involved in the cover-up, their modus operandi, and what they did to every major case in history, and also the changes that we saw in military policy after the Robertson panel of January 1953, which was funded by the CIA, who became very concerned about the UFOs in our sky and didn't think it would be a good idea to let the American public know that it was real.
Yeah, and at some points to me, I kind of understand why they would hide it because, we're crazy people. Like, we don't get along with each other. We really don't. and I say this a lot too. Like, if we have these weird boundaries between one another where it's race and politics and religion, there's no way we're going to be ready for a new walk of life.
I agree with you, especially with entities who look different than us, who communicate differently, who have advanced technology, who we look like cavemen compared to them, or I should say cavemen and women.
Right. We're primitive in that sense.
It would have a major impact on life on this world.
So I kind of give people my theory. And my theory is evolving. I'm going to tell you now, since I started this podcast and all the MUFON people are great. They're wonderful, very diverse. And a lot of the other investigators out there, my theory is of evolving, no doubt. But my initial theory is that the gray aliens are advanced mechanical robots with the consciousness uploaded. And they're here under a long-term study. And I say this because if you and I were walking through a park and we saw an ant colony, and they were driving combustion cars and flying planes, and they were having complex wars, we would lock that park off, right? We would study that ant colony indefinitely just to see how they would evolve. So that's kind of where I sit with it. Although, since I've been interviewing more and more of the investigators, my theory is evolving on what they are, right? I'm definitely finding biology being a part of this, and maybe external biology and a greater. So again, it's fascinating because there's so many different realms. So where I started from this, where I thought one thing, it evolves because I'm learning more information. And that's, and speaking to you, that's more of the information I like learning.
And that is very good that you are learning and that you are evolving, because when I started out more than 30 years ago doing this full time, I was a nuts and bolts investigator. I did not want to look beyond the nuts and bolts. People would say to me, like Jacques Vallée, who, how did it just dematerialize as it faded away? It didn't fly fast enough to be gone in the blink of an eye. It just dematerialized. And I did not want to face that. I couldn't wrap my head around it. And I probably sound like a complete nut now to those who are where I was more than 30 years ago and have very little understanding. But I have done a tremendous amount of investigation, experimentation, worked on 3 major studies on about 5,000 experiencers. 2 of those studies were with PhD scientists. And I myself have interviewed a couple of thousand experiencers probably over the years. I lead support groups at major conferences. People contact me on a daily basis through my website at Kathleen-Marden.com. I do charge for consultation, but I have consultations with people who are attempting to just understand what is going on in their lives. So, yes, a lot of people, a lot of experiments and experience.
You definitely got your hands full, huh?
I do. I really do. But I love this. It's. I think it was Buddha who said, if you find a job that you love, you will never work a day in your life, and that's the way it feels to me.
Well, that's perfect, right? That's perfect. So, what you said earlier about people thinking you're nuts, they can't. I'll tell you why. When you look at our science applications presently, in comparison to our science applications 30 years ago, night and day. If you would have told someone, let's say we go back to 1990 and we're like, hey, we're going to put something in our ear and we're going to be able to speak to one another from anywhere. People would think you're insane. Like, oh, you're crazy. That's witchcraft. You know what I mean?
Right.
So.
Yes. And any sufficiently advanced technology looks like magic to us. When we're less evolved.
Yeah. I mean, think about this. I approach this subject in a different way. There's no filters. I don't wear glasses, right? Like, I see everything as it is. And the old me would be like, well, it has to be on a table or in a cage, right? That's the only, but outside of that, when you start looking at what it is people are witnessing and what it is that we assume they are, how could we possibly understand what's going on? It wouldn't be. So when you're saying you see something dematerialize, we can't conceive that because it's not regular. It's not a regular application for us. So how we perceive that is going to be different than what really happens. Our brain is built to understand things that we learn over the course of time. So in other words, like if you travel another country to adjust to the timeline there, right? The jet lag, your brain's got to catch up to that. It's not instant. Right. So when you're seeing something remarkably advanced and you see it move in the sky a certain way, our brain isn't prepared to deal with that yet. It's a computer at the end of the day and it hasn't registered that information.
That is absolutely true. I remember the time when I thought, I just can't face this because it is just too confusing. It makes my head spin and my brain hurt. And,
Yeah.
and I wasn't ready to wrap my head around it. But over a number of years, I did, and I came to understand it much, much better than I had initially.
Yeah, that's because you had that time for your brain to accept the information, right? This is my point of view, by the way, about my brain. My brain, all the electricity in it, it's a computer. Our body's the machine. And again, whenever we witness something, we have to digest it. We have to take it in, analyze it, and then we can take a different approach to it later.
Yes.
And outside of that, there's people that judge. I don't do it. I'll tell you why I don't judge. Because I don't know enough to judge. Like, what do I know?
Well, many people judge in ignorance.
Right.
And that's not a good thing to do because they just make themselves look ignorant to those who know the truth and know that they don't know the truth.
Yeah. And, what ends up happening is, and I say this a lot, if you walk in a room with filters, you're going to miss something. And you don't want to, you don't want to miss it, especially when it's something of interest. You don't want to miss that. Even if you're in college and there's a course you're in and you're like, this is bogus. And then somewhere in your work life, it becomes practical and you're like, damn it, I should have listened. You know what I mean? So same for this. You have to approach everything with a wide open mind. And that's my approach to this thus far.
You have to be wide open, but not so wide open that your brains fall out.
Yeah. Then you get to that point where you're overinvested and like hypothetically, you're out there looking for a leprechaun and you're so programmed to find one that you're going to see one everywhere you go, even though it's not there.
You have to maintain your rational mind.
Right.
But be open to exploration and experimentation.
That's science, right? That's what science is. Like you.
Absolutely.
I say this a lot too. Kathleen, I say this a lot. Today's science was yesterday's theory. Yesterday's theory was a curiosity of a child fueled by imagination. That's how it works. Or else we wouldn't have science.
Mm-hmm.
So Barney and Betty Hill. I've learned somewhat about it. For what happened to them in that era, and it's the very obvious point that they were an interracial couple. So they definitely did not want to make that public for reasons of they didn't want to be sensationalized, right? That leads me to believe that what happened, that's real. Because especially in that era, I would imagine they would want to steer away from public attention, especially with, considering all.
Yes, they absolutely did. And let me tell you, Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. Barney worked for the post office, but both of them were very actively involved in the civil rights movement, in political affairs in the state of New Hampshire. In 1965, before their story was made public as the result of a violation of confidentiality, first they had been invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration for working on the campaign. They took me along, by the way, which I really was pleased with and will never forget. The next thing that happened was that Barney received a commendation from the Archdiocese in the state of New Hampshire for setting up a literacy program, because in those days you had to pass a literacy test in order to vote. The next thing that happened in 1965 was that he received an award from Sergeant Shriver from the Federal Poverty Program for setting up the Rockingham County Community Action Program with funding through the Office of Economic Opportunity. And then in May of 1965, he was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights as a member of the State Advisory Committee. So they had a lot going for them in terms of the good work that they were doing. They were highly intelligent. Barney's IQ was 140. I would estimate that Betty's was about the same, although she hadn't taken an IQ test. She was brilliant. And they were just a good couple doing good things for their community, their state, their nation. And they did not want anything to interfere with that.
Right. So their incident with all that being said, tells me legit, because why would you, in other words, why would you want to come off as crazy? I don't even think in that era you were crazy for speaking about UFOs, were you? I don't even remember that. I don't know.
Well, in those days, especially related to abduction, people could possibly think that if they didn't know who you were. The CIA in January of 1953 had been very interested from the previous summer, actually, in the UFO sightings. There were many, many of them across the United States and around the world. And so they set up the CIA-funded Robertson panel that met in January of 1953. And they had 6 politically connected, high-ranking scientists and members of the CIA, Air Force, etc. Alan Hynek was there for part of the time. He was an astrophysicist and the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book's consultant, astronomical consultant. So they met for 5 days, and in the end, they made the decision that they were going to debunk UFOs, and they were going to attempt to dissuade the American public that UFOs were not real. One of the primary reasons for this is that we were in a Cold War, and their stated reason was that if Russia wanted to have a preemptive attack on the United States, they could use Russian sympathizers in the United States who would clog up the phone lines with UFO reports. And it sounds crazy to me. Talk about crazy. And so that was one of the reasons they used. And what they decided they would do is that they would enlist scientists, well-known scientists, who would go on television or radio shows or write newspaper articles or magazine articles or even books to provide false information for the American public in order to convince people that UFOs were not real, and to paint anyone who had a UFO sighting as a kook. And especially, we hadn't had any UFO abduction reports back in 1953. That was the time of the Space Brother contactees, who were meeting with human-looking entities who said they were here to assist us if we wanted assistance from them. So, that was just part of it. And they did this to Betty and Barney in 1965 when this was made public. And in 1966, when Betty and Barney allowed the first book to be written on their case. And then in 1975, when the made-for-television movie, The UFO Incident, starring James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons, aired on television, it was really ramped up. Barney died in 1969, so it didn't have a negative impact on him, except for the false information they were giving posthumously. But for Betty, they painted her with a different brush. They made her look like a lifelong science fiction fan, which was a big fat lie, and that she was a kook, which was a big fat lie as well. She was a very well-grounded, highly intelligent person, but they were running psychological operations on Barney and Betty. Barney before he died, and it continued with Betty, and I moved in with her. I was a college student at the time. I moved out of my dormitory and moved to an apartment in Betty's house and lived there. So just to keep her company with and to give her some love and reassurance when these very weird things were being done at her house when she was working during the day.
Man, so, the impact of that abduction, that impacted their lives negatively, like tremendously.
Yes. Yes. I mean, Barney said to Betty, don't ever tell anyone about this. Nothing good can come of it. And essentially, nothing good did come of it.
Right.
Betty became very interested in the topic. Before she died, she said that she was happy that it happened because it gave her the opportunity to meet many people and learn many things that she wouldn't have met if this had not happened.
Right.
But, that was her final assessment on her experience.
The toll it took on Barney, I read, because the missing time, and a man of his intelligence, when there's missing time, that plagues you a little bit. It would plague me, right? Like, I would want to know what happened. I would want an explanation. I imagine, and not only that, but then the ridicule that comes with it from the military and people all the same. I imagine life for them was overall tough afterward from just the attention. And I imagine, did Barney have any nightmares or any issues afterward resulting as that incident?
Well, let me start by saying that Barney was greatly impacted because, and this is in the original records, documented evidence, that he had conscious continuous recall of observing non-human entities looking down at him. They were dressed in black, shiny uniforms. All of them moved to a panel. This is as it was hovering over a field 100 feet above him. Their arms went up. Little red lights started to slide out from the craft on little fin-like structures, and something started to drop down out of the bottom of the craft. We know today that is a sort of a tractor beam, if you want to think of it in science fiction terms,
right.
that when that hits you, you're absorbed into it and taken into the craft. He immediately became terrified. He thought that they were going to capture him like, quote, a bug in a net, close quote. And that's when he pulled the binoculars down away from his eyes so forcefully that he broke the leather strap and ran back to the car screaming to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. When he got into the car, he noticed that the craft was coming back in his direction. He went speeding down the highway. Within moments, he and Betty heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car. And they felt a tingling sensation through their bodies. The car vibrated. The next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway. They had memories of encountering a roadblock, of observing a fiery orb sitting on the ground, of finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around. They couldn't remember precisely where that was or how they arrived in that spot. But now they were back on the highway. They drove home. And yes, they had missing time. They arrived at 5:15 in the morning. They anticipated they would arrive between 2 and 3 a.m. There was physical evidence. When Barney arrived home, he noticed that his best dress shoes were so deeply scraped that he ended up having to buy new shoes. There was vegetative debris on his pant legs. He didn't know how that had happened. There were so many unanswered questions in the physical evidence that they had. Their watches had broken and never worked again. Betty's dress was torn. There were so many things. And this had a very big impact on Barney. Barney didn't have those nightmares. Barney wasn't able to sleep. In fact, he had so much anxiety over this fear that he was going to be captured after he saw these non-humans and had the conscious continuous recall of this and the physical evidence to go along with it and the missing time, that he became just an extremely distressed individual. He ended up having bleeding ulcers that he was hospitalized with. He nearly died. He had high blood pressure, all attributable to this event.
Yeah,
and this is why he was referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon for hypnosis, because Ben Simon had been a lieutenant colonel during World War II, and he was the psychiatrist who set up the neuropsychiatric unit at the Mason General Hospital on Long Island in New York, and very successfully treated soldiers returning from the front with psychogenically induced symptoms, such as Barney had. He had psychogenically induced symptoms with the high blood pressure, with the bleeding ulcers. And Dr. Simon very, very successfully treated these individuals. In fact, there was a movie, Let There Be Light, made about his work, and he successfully treated Barney. So there were some people, no one who knew them. They were treated very well in the state of New Hampshire. They were known. People knew the kind of people they were. They knew that they were not a couple of kooks or anything else that somebody else might say. They had support from the military. They had many friends in the military officers who confirmed that, yes, UFOs are real, and yes, they believed that this happened to them. But when you go back to this Robertson panel program, disinformation program, then you had some individuals, not military necessarily. A lot of it was CIA, three-letter agencies, who and just maybe adult bullies too, who just liked attacking people and making their lives difficult.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that humans have, our race is, we're very mean-spirited. It's terrible. You know, you would think that we would be more accepting of all the you have to be accepting of all the differences on this globe. You have no choice. We're very diverse as a species. Unfortunately,
we are, but you know what? We're a warlike race, and that's very unfortunate.
It is.
The ETs say, and this comes from all of those studies that I talked about, that our spiritual development is out of sync with our technological progress. And when this happens, it threatens a planet. It could result in the extinction of life on this planet. And that this is the reason that they came when we began our nuclear explosions and nuclear testing after World War II, and why they stayed, because they're very, very concerned that we will destroy this beautiful planet.
Yep. You know, circling back to the ant pile that we found, that's really technologically advanced. Let's go to scale. They build their own nukes to their scale, and the devastation of their nukes might equate for 20 feet in circumference, right? For us, it would definitely catch our attention. Like, what are they doing? Why are they doing this? And we would definitely watch. We'd want to see the results of that. But I think when it comes to the point where the ants could blow up more than the 20-foot circumference, I think that's when we get involved, right? And so yes. If you scale it up, what we're doing, the minute we start getting to a point where we could destroy it, we're going to destroy the planet, I think they get involved. I would imagine
yes.
so.
Yes, they say that they will.
So it's tough. Like when you hear, like I'm going to be interviewing experiencers, people abducted or other contacts. I haven't yet. I do have some off-air interviews I do that are non-podcasts. I hear a lot of fascinating things. One thing I've learned, now I shared this with Douglas Wilson of MUFON, about the abduction. I noticed that a pattern anyway, starting around, I think it was like the late 2000s to 2010s, that abductions are beginning to slow down. And I wonder if that's because of all the technology in our homes that makes it relatively easily to watch us without that need to do. You know, think about it. Like we made it really easy for them to eavesdrop on us and learn outside of anything invasive.
Well, that is very true. And think about this. They were close to the end, possibly, of their intergenerational program, where they were taking family lines in order to attempt to upgrade human DNA to try to save us.
Right.
And from what my former team at MUFON, I was the director of experiencer research for 10 years. I stepped down last spring because my husband was extraordinarily ill in the hospital, and I no longer had the time to do that job. I am now a consultant to the team. But the team was talking about how it does appear that people are no longer having genetic material taken, that the hybridization program may have come to an end, and experiencers are growing older, and they're still having contact, but it's different. They are having these entities who are fifth dimensional or higher come into our environment. The humans can feel them through a strong electrical tingling in their bodies. They feel euphoric, and they might receive messages, but they can't see these entities because we have a very narrow range of vision, and we cannot see into other dimensions. So you might see just a little shimmering or a little outline, but a lot of people can only feel them, can sense their presence, and can communicate with them telepathically. So that seems to be the new trend. Downloads of information and given to the humans. And also, the only reason why humans seem to be needing to be taken now is that they are healing people. Their original abductees are growing older. They develop health problems, and they do healing on them. In fact, I worked with one experiencer who had developed cancer, lymphoma. His neck was huge with the cancerous glands. I have his medical report, and it also went to a medical doctor that I know and trusted. And so I said to this experience, Jim is his name, I said, well, I know many people who have been healed. So first of all, are you a religious person? He said, yes. And I said, well, pray to God for healing. And I said, also, send telepathic messages to your ETs repeatedly every day. Well, not too long after that, Jim got in touch with me, and he sent me a video. And this video was of an orb, beautiful, white center, baby blue halo around it, that slid down his bedroom wall and flew like a butterfly across the room. It hovered over his body and put down iridescent tendrils before it dove down into his body. Now, he immediately fell asleep. He slept for 12 hours, and when he woke up, there were no visible nodes on his neck. When he went in to his oncologist for the surgery, 4 tiny necrotic, meaning dying nodes, were removed. They were not cancerous. So that's extraordinary evidence.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You want you got to preserve the subject, right, for the study.
Absolutely.
And so I have a theory. I'll share it with you. As far as their telepathy, I have reason to believe that is their form of advanced Bluetooth, right? Now, if you think what the application of Bluetooth entails, if they put something in your body, it does not have to be in your brain. For us right now with our current technology, like Neuralink, we got to put in the brain. It's the only thing that's powered, electrodes, etc. But they could put this object anywhere, in anyone, at any time, and communication could be their form of Bluetooth. at a very advanced level. When I heard people describe, I listened to a lot of older documentaries, a lot of older interviews from like, the 70s, 80s. And I heard the way they in other words, they were giving me an image of what the Greys were doing while they were communicating. They were looking down at them in a certain way, and they would just, it's like they just knew, and the subject themselves just knew what was going on, right? So now imagine the other theory I have, the Greys with their eyes, the black eyes, scanners, and those are just advanced scanners and different machinery inside there. I don't want to just say continue to say scanner. The best way I could say it is like, imagine a very advanced doctor will be able to look at you and immediately look at your body and see what's going on. So there's cameras, sensors, and scanners in there, and they're Bluetooth. The way they describe them speaking, the first thing that pops in my head every time is that they have an internal Bluetooth, and we can't see it. And so when people, experiencers, when they take them, I hear a large number of them, they have something implanted. That's not just for tracking. That could be for communication. They don't
need it for tracking. It's primarily for communication and to be aware of the health of the human body. Because they're very concerned about our health, our exposure to environmental toxins. Yeah. And I do want to say that, yes, there are some Greys that are biorobotic or clones, if you want to call them that, who they do the menial jobs. They're the ones who take people to craft. They're the ones who make sure you don't get off the craft with anything that belongs to them.
Yeah, or field study, like our rovers.
Yes, that sort of thing. But then there are sentient Grey beings as well, and experiencers do see them age.
Now they're taller, the sentient ones.
Yes, they are.
Right. I've heard that consistently too. And it makes sense, because here's another thing. Right now, currently on Mars, we have rovers, helicopter, et cetera, et cetera. If we had it our way, there would be bipedal robots out there that resemble us in a sense and could do the field work at a much more adequately anyway than what a rover can do. They're just, they're there. We're not. So when people hear about, well, why the Greys, why make robots? Well, if we can make people robots go to Mars and do the work for us, we would do it in a heartbeat. It makes prime sense for that. In all the people you've interviewed, how many negative abductions did you come across?
I'm thinking of my statistics. The negative abductions were less than 10%, highly negative. Evil, about 6%. Most were neither positive nor negative. You have about 20% highly positive. So, and then about 20% said that they were MyLab abductions, military and the aliens working together. So, probably about 20% on each end and 60% that are just neither positive nor negative.
Yeah. Are you learning that or have you seen observed a lot of parallels between ufology and the paranormal?
Oh, yes, there's definitely an overlap. That's has been borne out by all three of my studies that I've worked on. And the most prevalent overlap is intelligent light orbs in the home of the experiencer. Now, I have some theories on that. And I suspect that since these are higher dimensional beings, they can appear as a conscious orb, and it's a lot easier than to try to lower their vibrational frequency to come into the human environment. And then the second most prevalent, or actually the most prevalent, is about 75% of experiencers say that they have the feeling that something unseen is walking on their bed.
Huh. Did they ever describe like they could feel like the pressure that when I say the pressure, like when you're laying in your bed and you can feel the pressure of someone getting into the bed change?
Oh yes,
They describe.
absolutely.
I hear that a lot in the off. So the off podcast interviews, that is the most common thing I'm coming across, where they can feel compression on the bed in the middle of the night. And even though for whatever reason, the individual, and I'm telling you, these people don't know each other. Again, Kathleen, when I came to this, I didn't know anything. I'm doing these interviews. So for me, brand new, right?
Yes.
One thing these people, and there's no way they know each other. They all said the same thing. They had they felt a presence, the bed compression change, and they could feel the temperature alter around them. And these are people that don't even know each other. And here's the best part. Most of these people were speaking about their UFO or their alien incident, as well as these are the paranormal people I'm interviewing speaking about the ghost. It's identical.
Yes.
So make room for this, maybe, right? This is my theory. It's my imagination from my childhood running wild. We're being observed by a higher intelligence. They're down here and they're watching us, and they see not just us, but they see, like, let's say an apparition, a ghost. And the alien's like, what the hell is that now? So no, undoubtedly they're gonna monitor both, right? And that's what I think if I had to assume what Skinwalker Ranch is, I think it's our observers observing the abnormalities in what they thought would be like a rural place. And that's pretty common across the world. I'm seeing these Skinwalker Ranch type places. It's always somewhere really rural. So,
yes, that is prevalent. I investigated a big case in Texas a few years back that had the same sort of thing going on. Time slips. This was at an airport. The pilot who had retired was running it, and he was having UFO activity and craft landing on his field. He was seeing UFOs. He was being abducted. One night he ended up a mile away from his house wearing only his underwear. And no shoes, barefoot.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Not the ideal trip.
No. He was a very, very frightened man, I have to tell you. And one night he was up. He got up during the night. He lived there at the airport. And he opened he looked out the window in his door down into the hangar. And there he saw a bark brown, tall, non-human entity standing against the wall, and three smaller ones who were white and were wearing silver suits and silver boots. And he said the way those three moved was just like a gate swings. They were probably just these biorobotic entities.
Right.
And I asked him what happened next. He said, well, I guess I went up to bed. And I had a feeling that they took him that night, but I didn't say that. I would never say that to anyone because it would frighten him. But he did have experiences where he knew he was taken, where he had some memories, and he was trying to make it end. He ended up handcuffing himself to the wall, putting boards over his windows, sleeping with a Glock. He had a really hard time with all of this. And unfortunately, the UFO community didn't want to help him because there was paranormal involvement with the time slip, with the mammoths grazing on a grassy savanna when he and his mother looked out the window at the runway one day. And he also had his shirt off. He was working in his office, and something invisible made three deep scratches down his chest that took about a month to heal up. So he had this going on. He had positive, he had negative, he had interdimensional, he had paranormal. He had, I even have a photograph of a light being who came in and there was a darker entity behind her, and he interpreted this as an angel who would come to save him from the darker entity. But in the end, he left everything. He just picked up and he left that airport and lost everything in order to get away from this.
It's crazy. You know, there's a couple things to that. One, I'm arranging for 3 experiencers to come on the show because the 3 of them shared a pretty idea. I haven't even introduced them to each other yet. We'll do it on the show. They experienced something similar. And right when you said the handcuffs, I've heard all 3. None of them know each other. They've done some, like, tie themselves to beds, handcuff, extra measures of locking themselves down. Like, it's, you know, when you hear from one person, you're like, oh, okay. But when there's 3 different people from 3 different parts of the country that you know don't communicate and their story lines up, something's there.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Something's
Absolutely.
there. Thing 2, what you said earlier about, you know, the UFO guys who want to touch exact paranormal aspects. Stephen Murr, are you familiar with him?
Stephen who?
Murr.
Murr?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
He's in England. He's a paranormal specialist, right?
Okay.
And I had him on the show not long ago. We're going to have him on again. He's a parapsychologist as well. I'm sorry. He says there are too many barriers between these groups, right? You can't compartmentalize this information. The paranormal, the ufology, even Bigfoot at this camp, you know, you have to share this in an open network in order to really get to the bottom of it. I mean,
well, I agree. And for a number of years, I've been working with people in the paranormal community. There used to be a locked gate between the two, and they did not want to communicate. And to me, I was looking for answers, and I knew about this paranormal overlay. And so I started working with people like Paul and Ben Eno, who have a big name as paranormal researchers. They're from Rhode Island, and others, the spirit hunters from the South, and a number of other people, to put our heads together, because we're only going to find the answers if we cooperate and collaborate with one another.
Agreed. You know, that's what I'm doing currently right now, even with you, is I started this podcast is almost 3 months old. I haven't even advertised it yet. I want to build a network first. And that's what I'm doing. So I have the people from paranormal, people from ufology, paranormal stuff, even some of the people that are skeptical. I got to build it because if I'm going to do a documentary eventually. I'm going to travel. And no better way for me to go find what I'm looking for is just to have a network across the country of knowing where to go. And
yes.
I'm trying to bridge more gaps. I've introduced several, like Mike Penicello and Dan Spell from MUFON. They're the directors of their respectable states. They knew of one another, they just didn't communicate. Well, now I have both of them coming on monthly to speak about cases. I introduced them to each other.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah, Douglas Wilson was on the show. He is giving me great pointers on how to investigate, what instruments to have. Steve Murr, which I really think you and Steve Murr need to talk. I think you would enjoy his conversations. He's got a very diverse mindset when it comes to the approach of this study. In fact, I really feel strongly I'm going to connect the two of you because I really think from your experience and his experience and the way you guys think, I think you could find an answer, honestly. I'm just,
Yes.
And that's, at the end of the day, I do this podcast not because I'm dying for likes and views and I really want answers. I got involved because I want answers. I also have detectives on the show, homicide detectives that talk about, eventually we're going to be talking about cold cases and missing persons, etc. But I speak of their experiences and I hear the way they view things. And there's a lot of people out there that are involved with ufology that are former detectives and they're training in their train of thought. It's powerful stuff.
Yes. Yes.
And for what you're saying, I 100% stand behind what you're saying. You got to be able to open gates and share information and build a powerful network. You can't just be like, well, we're this guy and they're that guy and that's that. You can't do that. And
you cannot deny the paranormal, interdimensional part of all of this.
Well, yeah.
It overlaps. All of our studies show that. If, for years, many UFO investigators have simply thrown out anything that didn't fit into their little box.
Right.
So if it was a conscious orb in a person's home, there could be some kind of other explanation for that. We're not going to consider that as testimony or evidence in the case. The walking on the bed. Oh, all these other things. They're part and parcel of this phenomena, these phenomena.
And it's tough too, because here's science again. Things we called crazy 20, 30 years ago are practical applications today.
Oh, absolutely.
So you have to make room. You have to. And again, humans, until we have a machine that could, by all means, find exactly what the mysterious is, till then, you have to investigate. And you can't cast out. And you definitely can't have a closed mind, because you're not going to learn anything.
If you adhere to the zeitgeist of the old guard, you are never going to make progress, scientific progress. You're never going to have a great discovery, because you're doing things the old way over and over again. It didn't work the old way. You can't expect that 50 years later, it's going to suddenly work.
Yeah. And, Bob Lazar made a statement. I was listening to some of his stuff, and he said it pretty right. He goes, well, the technology at the time that we had we weren't able to replicate what we said. So we'll put it on the shelf and see what technology is like in 20, 30 years. And then if you look about where he spoke about that element, where they called him crazy in the 80s, 90s, then in the late 90s and 2000s, it becomes an actual element. That's a prime example of you don't know. This guy mentions this. It's nonsense then, and now it's real. And he does. Not only is he not getting any credit for it, but he's shunned even further for I believe the FBI raided him looking for this because they thought he had it or something of that nature.
Well, actually, Anon Pentium, element 115,
right,
has a half-life of less than a second. We have not figured out how to stabilize it yet,
right,
as far as I know. I've received information from an individual who was communicating with ETs, and he had a drawing. He had all of the chemical elements, everything that needed to go into it. I passed it on to a physicist and an engineer.
Yeah, another example, Betty Hill she described a star chart at the time. People like that's not real, doesn't exist. And then we find out later it is real, and it's exactly as she depicted.
Not only that, but the stars on that map have very special properties. A lot of people don't realize this, but Marjorie Fish, who was a member of Mensa, brilliant woman, amateur astronomer. After she was teaching school at the time, but after she did this work, she worked at the Oak Ridge National Nuclear Laboratory in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, as a research assistant. And Marjorie spent several years attempting to identify the stars on Betty's map, but she couldn't find a match because we had not advanced enough technologically to have accurate distance data out 54 light years in all directions from our sun. Finally, we advanced. She had new distance data. There were 3 stars that hadn't previously been believed to been within 54 light years. She had built 14 models at that point. She found the volume of space where Betty's map ended up being a perfect match for what she had constructed in these 3-dimensional models. And imagine the math that she had to do with collecting all the distance data and all of the characteristics of the stars out 54 light years from our sun, and building these models and doing the geometry to know precisely where to put every one of those stars. Then the astronomers who vetted Marjorie's work realized that all of the stars on Betty's map are sun-like stars. although only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood out 54 light years are sun-like. And all of the sun-like stars in the volume of space where Betty's map is are on Betty's map. Not only that, one of the astronomers said that if we were scientists from the Zeta Reticuli star system and we were exploring space, that is precisely the route that we would take, because all of those star systems are in a plane, like pizza on pepperoni on pizza,
Right.
as opposed to raisins spread out in a thick loaf of raisin bread. So that just makes sense. That is the fastest route.
Yeah, I mean, case in point, she depicted this, and the just by description, the amount of work put into to discover these stars and these systems, and she was giving us information long before it was even a thought in someone's mind, you know?
Absolutely.
So again,
Yes.
before you call someone crazy, here's how. Imagine this: it's mid-90s, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to put some headphones on and listen to music that's going to come from the clouds, right? People are going to think you're nuts. They don't have no idea what you're talking about. Download music, what? So that's the point I make. And so when it comes to investigating the paranormal and ufology, you got to open doorways. I'm not saying for all of them. There are definitely people out there in both categories they're out there to get some likes. They're out there to get some attention. They're going to falsify and fake some stuff. That's what everyone, I mean, respectfully, it's going to happen. You know, it's unavoidable. But
if you're going to last, you have to be respected.
Right. Agreed. And so, and I convey a message to people out there. Like, if, you know, the ones that are looking at likes, you're going to falsify some footage and pictures, don't do it, because you're going to damage the real study. By all means, if you're going to make something fictional, classify it as fictional. I promise you I'll still watch it if it's entertaining, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you got to separate it. That's why we have news and entertainment separate, or not anymore. But so before we close, where in your career, have you witnessed anything directly? Like in the sky or anything like a UFO, anything like that?
Yes, I have.
What was your experience with that?
I've seen UFOs. I've seen orbs. I've done experiments with a man who has a relationship with ETs, and I have been able to communicate with one of those telepathically. I have been able to feel that very strong tingling in my body, so I know what it feels like, and to receive some information as well. So, you know, when I said experimentation, I do experiment.
Right. You know, you got to understand how powerful the brain is. It's extremely powerful. Like for focus factors, like I shoot pool and I want to do really well. I'm going to focus today. I'm going to put the full strength of my mind into what I'm doing. You can achieve things like meditation. People don't realize we don't use the full capacity of our brain, right? And so when it's, by the way, when you're saying about vibrations, I'd spoken to Roberta Grimes. She's an afterlife person. It's similar. Like I keep saying, there's so many parallels, and the vibrations and the amount of focus you could put out there, and the channeling, you could definitely channel stuff. I mean, you experienced things because you went out there and you looked, as opposed to the people that are naysayers that sit in their house like, nope, that's not real, because they don't take the time to get out there and find something and learn something. You know, it's just, it's sad. So, and I say to people, before you criticize, go discover facts. Put 2 years into it before you naysay. And if you come up with nothing, then by all means naysay, but be courteous about it. Like for me, when I do the documentary, I'm going to go. And so Kathleen, so you know, I'm one of those people, I just run to go see what it is. So if there's ever something dangerous, it might be the last thing I document. It might be the last thing we talk about. You know what I mean? But it'll be documented. Mm-hmm. Well, in any event, Kathleen, I enjoyed speaking with you thoroughly.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed speaking with you as well.
And one last time, your book, and where can they find it?
I have 5 books. I'm going to have a 6th published soon. All of my books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, in all of the formats. If you'd like an autographed copy and you live in the United States, you can go to my website at Kathleen with a K -Marden, MARDEN.com, and autographed copies of my books are available there.
Good. I'm going to get some of the autographed ones myself. And I'm going to put that into the description of the podcast. So we'll have some links for that. In the meantime,
yes,
go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to, never mind. That's okay.
That's all right. My apologies. Again, I'm definitely going to get some autographed books. I'm buying them right away.
You. Okay.
Kathleen, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We will talk again soon.
Okay. Great speaking with you. Take care.